Iran's defense minister has warned the U.S. of a firm response if it continues to harass the country's ships and oil tankers in international waters.
We
have clearly announced that we do not tolerate any harassment. Americans and their allies know that they will undoubtedly receive a firm and crushing response if they continue their acts of harassment.
Brigadier General Amir Hatami described U.S. acts of harassment at high seas as piracy. He said such moves are against international law. Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif had earlier warned against the U.S. provocative acts through dispatching its naval forces to the Caribbean Sea with the goal of disrupting the course of Iranian tankers carrying fuel for Venezuela. Iran is shipping tons of gasoline to Venezuela in defiance of U.S. sanctions on both countries. Tony Gosling is an investigative journalist who joins us. Tony Gosling, what is the U.S. exactly objecting to when it comes to Iran, and why is it taking such a confrontational approach for Iran to deliver some badly needed gasoline that Venezuela needs because Venezuela is under sanctions?
Well, I'm sorry, my webcam seems to have automatically switched itself off just as you asked me that question. But the reason here is I think we have to understand the context of this very, very important move by Trump. I mean, they're talking now about social distancing on the high seas, aren't they? You must stay 100 meters away from our warships. Well, of course, warships can attack other warships from much, much further away than 100 meters. So this is really a kind of superficial measure. And what the Americans are doing at the moment is rather like the Royal Navy used to do. That is simply using ships to project terror around the world. So in the old days, when somebody didn't pay their debts to the British Empire, the Royal Navy would turn up out on their doorstep and start shelling one of their cities. This is effectively the projection of power that the US Navy is now attempting to do around the world.
Yeah, but it's got a military taste to it. I mean, it seems like the U.S. is somewhat giving it a military angle to it for the simple delivery of some fuel to another country. And mind you, this is during the COVID-19 pandemic happening for both countries, but of course Venezuela, where prior, even before the COVID-19, U.S. sanctions are said to have cost 40,000 Venezuelan lives. I mean, you would think that this wouldn't be the case for Iran, for the U.S. to approach Iran in this formal manner.
Well, if they were decent people, that is, but there is another agenda going on, and the Israel lobby is incredibly powerful in the United States. We have to take a step back and look at history, I think. We had, in the First World War, we had the removal of Ottoman control from the Middle East, and that went over to the British Empire. In the Second World War, and of course the Balfour Declaration as well, in the Second World War, the creation of the Israeli state. Now it looks to me as if this plan from 1871, which was leaked by Albert Pike, the Scottish Rite Freemason, is in full swing, because this plan from the 1870s said exactly what seems to be happening. I've no idea if it was true or not, but if you look at world events, it certainly seems to be. What is being attempted by the US is an attempt to foment war between the Zionists, who I would term the nihilists, because I don't think that they really follow the Old Testament at all, even though they use a lot of the accoutrements of that. They call themselves Jewish, etc. That is an attempt to foment war in the Middle East between the Zionist state and Islam, and to draw in the superpowers to that conflict. Now, that was the plan. It seems to be the plan right now, and the United States is not acting in its own interests or the world's interests. It seems to be acting for the Zionists, trying to initiate this conflict. Now look at what happened right at the very start of January with Soleimani killed. This is an assassination of a foreign leader of their military, an absolutely appalling act, no excuse for it whatsoever under international law, a war crime, a provocation. So this proves, I think, that the Americans are simply trying to provoke what could turn into a third world war very easily, with the Middle East being the spark. What we're looking at here potentially is brutalism and mass murder, international organized crime really calling the shots. And so that's what I think is behind this ridiculous projection of power through the US Navy in this case.
And you talked about the social distancing happening in the waters, in terms of the U.S. announcing that no one should come in the vicinity of 100 meters to the U.S. warships. I mean, is that just meant for Iran, or do you think it's also perhaps a message being sent out to China in the South China Sea, or maybe elsewhere where the U.S. is acting provocatively in countries that it's in the area of where these tankers are?
Well, put it this way, it's not meant for Royal Navy frigates. Of course, this is this is really literally a threat to the whole of the world's shipping from the United States Navy. It's an attempt to project power, as they've done in many other ways. I mean, for example, in space and in the cyber sphere, there is an attempt to project US power all over the world in these ways. But let's imagine a little thought experiment. What if the Iranian Navy was to be sailing along next to San Francisco and daring the US Navy to sail out of the San Diego harbor anywhere near one of their ships? I think that we would get a very, very different response from the United States in that circumstance. And it's always very, very useful to look at these comparisons, to turn the tables and a what-if experiment on what if another power like China or Iran was to do this to the United States, because this is one thing the Western media never does in these circumstances. They simply ignore the obvious comparisons and the double standards.
Thank you very much for that. Tony Gosselin, we appreciate it. Investigative journalist.